Today we're talking about the control center, which it's the central management server that all the Uplogix local managers, that all the terminal console servers at the edge, they all report back to the central server. And so it allows us to centrally manage users and things like that. So let's, this is another kind of sample. This is what your network looks like in an abstract form, right? On the left, you've got your centralized NOC. In this case, in Denver is where the control center lives, the primary. And then on the right-hand side, you've got, that could be a clinic or a hospital or a data center, whatever the remote site is where the Uplogix local manager is connected. Um, and so, if you imagine, across the country, we've got, dozens of these at the different sites, and they all report back to the control center every 30 seconds by default. Um, and it lets us do things like group things by region so that maybe we can give access to the right users or have the right network services available and configured for them. It lets us do device management from a centralized point of view. So if you remember the local managers, they're all logging into the routers and switches, and they know what type of devices they are. They know, for example, that one is a Cisco 3000 series versus the Nexuses. And so because we're gathering that information and we're um, uh, collecting all of that in the central server, that lets us do management of these devices en masse, right? So if you need to, for example, upgrade, all of your, switches, the Uplogix knows where the switches are and how to assist with that. So yeah, the central server gives us a single place where we can, kind of filter and select those devices for management if we need to. Same with users, right? It gives us a central place to do our user management. In your case, you guys are going back to a AAA server for that, and I believe automatically creating users based on groups. And so the control center facilitates that. It lets us, track, manage, disable, audit, users from a central point of view. And then, also further, in terms of getting users access to particular devices, and we'll go deeper into this in the security section in a coming week. But it lets us tag devices. So if we have devices that the WAN team only needs to touch, we can use labels to tag them, and then we can give users permission based on those tags or labels, or do management based on that as well. And then it also gives us a central place from which we can manage upgrades for the local managers or update their settings. If we need to push a new NTP server address out to everybody, or new DNS servers, we can do that from the control center with just a couple clicks. So it's all about centralizing management here in the control center. So it's a web-based platform. So the local managers, all of them that are reporting back, they're going to be giving you real-time data on their status, right? Both the Uplogix and for all of our routers and switches that we're connected to. It gives us a method of controlling and enforcing what we call granular authorization, where if a user doesn't have permissions to configure or use the Uplogix in certain ways, we enforce that in the GUI as well. So if you don't have permission to configure rules in this example, you won't be allowed to click on it. You won't be allowed to change things there. Speaking of rules, it gives us a central place with a nice GUI that lets us edit our rules. And the rules, they're how we achieve custom automation. And we have a whole section about that coming up near the end of the training. Actually, two different sections that touch on the rules. But the UCC, the control center, gives us a nice place to create those rules and then edit them if we need to tweak them as you kind of test them out. It also gives us a nice place to look at our logs That could be, user sessions, it could be events, it could be, alarms we're seeing, or also all the monitoring that we can do. We have a whole set of service level verification suites that, you can test the network various ways from the Uplogix, and then look at the data in the control center there, charted out nicely and so forth. The control center also acts as an alarm and trap manager, so as the Uplogix is logging into your routers and switches, it can detect problems and it creates an alarm when we see, certain things going wrong. For example, if a router comes up into Ronmon, or we can't talk to it for some reason, that'll generate an alarm. And the alarms will be sent along to our Uplogix control center, where you can view them there. But the control center can go ahead and package those alarms up, and it'll send them along to your other systems as SNMP traps. So we can forward those to whatever SNMP management tools you're using, or also use email to send out that information. So we take all the info that we're gathering at the edge, we aggregate it in the control center, and then we can send it on to your other tools from there. Like I was saying, we're gathering tons of information, and it's all percolating up to the control center. So that lets us do reporting and auditing, whether that's, user sessions or, units online, offline, that sort of stuff. We have a reporting system built in that can, you can look at a lot of this data on demand, or you can have it email you these reports on a schedule, daily, weekly, monthly, that sort of thing. So however you want to, see what's going on with your deployment with all of your gear, we've got a way of integrating it. So if you want to, log in, the defaults administrator password in the VA system, of course, you guys are all going to use your network logins. But if you want, in the chat, we've got that sedemo.uplogix.com. And we just set up a single user for everybody to use. It's VA training for the username and the password. And when you log in, you'll notice across the top there's kind of a gray bar with different tabs, right? So, just to kind of give a quick overview of the dashboard, that's where you can pick a couple of Uplogix local managers to look at on a single page, and it'll give you their alarms and alerts. The inventory is where we have a hierarchical group-based inventory for all the local managers. So they're all going to be deployed into different groups. For you guys in VA, we've kind of got them split up by state right now, just to kind of make things easier to find when you're looking for a particular local manager. The administration tab is where we do most of the configuration of the control center itself. So again, most of you guys probably aren't going to have too much to do in there. That stuff's all set up with email integration and stuff right now. So, again, day to day, you probably won't need to worry about that too much. But that's where user management and group management and permissioning is also controlled. We also have an alarms tab that's just going to show you all the alarms for all the local managers that are reporting back to the control center. That's a good place to kind of get a quick feel for, the problems we're seeing. Then there is the schedule tab where, I was talking about pushing OS updates out to your routers and switches. The schedule tab lets you do jobs like that, where you can create a filter to identify the routers and switches you want to have it do a job on, and then you can create a job to do that on those systems en masse. And then finally, the reports tab, that's where we set up those reports that I was talking about, where you can view user logins or change reports or things like that. You can set those up in the reports tab. Again, you guys probably won't have to mess with that too much. But yeah, the dashboard, this is a great quick reference tool. So what I'll usually do is, if I have a couple of systems that I'm working with, I'll put them in my dashboard. And then when I log in, I can see right away, what's going on with those couple of systems. we kind of designed this feature for users that were going to have limited access. So you guys might end up, wanting to use that for yourselves as you get into your production environment and start working with it. So in the inventory group, I was telling you that it's got a kind of a hierarchical system. Um, it's basically you can configure things at the root group, and then they will kind of propagate down through the children group and to individual members in the groups. And this lets us do things like set permissions for different inventory groups for users, or do configuration things. Like, for example, we can set, NTP or DNS server addresses for all the Uplogix at a group level, and then the Uplogix will inherit them from the groups, and that prevents you from having to configure that stuff individually on every local manager. You've got a lot of that set up already in your inventory right now, but that's how it works. It's a hierarchical, nested group kind of a situation. So um, just to kind of show you what that looks like, let me pull up my demonstration control center, which you guys should have that VA training user and pass should get you in there. Now I'm logging in with a different user, so this touches on the security component a little bit. I have permission to a bunch of stuff that you guys don't in the training group there, but that's all based on the inventory groups. So for example, if I open these up a little bit, you can see we've got a couple of Uplogix in this remote site group, and then I've got this MSP example, and it has a couple of virtual local managers in it. So, if I want to, if I need to update, some settings on all of these units, I can go into the group, the VA group, and you'll notice on the left, I've got all these configuration elements. If I were to go in here and update the NTP address or to give it an NTP server to use, I could then use this force update to children to push that setting down to everything that's currently in those groups. So if I, need to manually update, NTP to whatever, um, then that's how we would do that. And it would inherit down through those groups. If I do this force update on children, it'll push that update to everything. Otherwise, the way it works is new units inherit whatever settings are in that group. So yeah, the inventory now, the you may notice that the Uplogix logos on all of the units in there right now are green. There are a couple of different colors that they can show up as, and it indicates different statuses. So green means that things are good and that there's a good communication between the local manager and the control center. That means that we call it heartbeat is our check-in there, and we do that heartbeat every 30 seconds by default. And so if we haven't heard from one of them in a while, like if a branch office or a clinic were to go offline and the Uplogix couldn't reach the control center anymore, within about 2 minutes, we'll turn that green icon gray so that you know that it's offline or that we haven't heard from it in a minute. And usually that would be when you guys would probably go ahead and dial into the Uplogix to, troubleshoot and remediate whatever's going on at the remote site. And then you'll see this occasionally when we're doing upgrades or maybe when you're deploying new units. The yellow icon indicates that the software version on the Uplogix is lower than the control center software version. And that means that we're stuck in what we call minimal heartbeat. And that just does some really basic check-in communication because it can't synchronize those configuration elements when the software versions are different. So if you see a yellow one, that just means that we need to upgrade it. It's just a couple clicks. It's easy to do. We'll go over that in one of the later sessions. But yeah, that's what the yellow means. It means that the Uplogix, the remote, is down version from the control center, and that it needs to be upgraded. you might see a black icon in there. That means that somebody manually added a local manager to the inventory, but it hasn't checked in yet. So that's kind of one of the ways we can do pre-provisioning. Usually we don't bother with that in actual production, but if you see one like that, that's what it means. And then the orange icon, you might see this with some of the units as we start to roll out the cellular modems. I know we have one or two here or there maybe in test, but you know, when they are on the cellular network and using that for their out-of-band connection, or if they were using, you know, a secondary network circuit on site for the out-of-band connection, then it's going to show up with a kind of orange logo there that indicates that, you know, the out-of-band is on and that it's using that for communicating with the control center. You know, yeah, just to touch a little bit more on these, heartbeat, like I said, that's the what we call the protocol that the local managers use to report back to the control center. So those come from the edge and they come into the NOC. You know, default is port 8443, and that's a TLS connection, so it's encrypted. We also have something we call Pulse, and this is how Pulse is a test that we use to control the out-of-band connection. So, you know, for those units that do have cellular or some type of IP-based out-of-band connection, what we do is we test our ability to reach the control center on TCP port 7, and we can test up to 3 endpoints for that, so that we don't get a false positive from just one endpoint being offline. But when we detect that we can't get back to the Pulse servers, that's when we will turn on the out-of-band connection. You know, usually, like I said, cellular or a secondary network connection that you have. And that's when you see them show up orange in the control center. So the Pulse is a network test that we use to determine when the WAN is no good, and turn on the out-of-band connection. And then we also have a process we call archive. So the heartbeat is a quick check-in, and it has current alarms and stuff like that, but it's very lightweight. And so bulk data like session logs, change logs, your configurations on your routers and configs, we back that up to the control center on a 1-hour schedule by default. Sometimes we'll cut that down to a lower interval. But yeah, so every hour by default, there's a process where all of our bulk data, like those user sessions and configurations, gets pushed up to the control center using that archive process on an hourly basis. Yeah, RS-232, that's for the serial connections. Yeah, you guys know what SSH is, so won't worry about that too much. So now, when you have a new local manager, and I'm sure this is covered in your provisioning documents, but you know, we talked yesterday or Tuesday about when you first get a local manager, you're going to put it on the network, and you're going to run config system IP, and that's going to let you enter an IP address for it so that it can, you know, be on the network. Once it's on the network, we need to point it to the control center. Now, I should mention we do have a feature where the local manager will automatically try and find the control center. You'll notice in this slide here where it says, you know, use management server, it says auto, and then where it says hostname or IP, it says searching. So that's a feature we call zero-touch deployment. And what happens there is that the local manager, it'll automatically just try to find the control center using a host name. It uses Uplogix-control-center. So a lot of times you can get these guys talking to the control center just like that with that host name. But if you want to use, you know, IP, you can easily just change that, run that config system management, and you can put in the host name or IP manually, and that's probably what you guys are going to be doing for provisioning. At that point, you know, you can change the port or this interval, although you don't really usually need to. And once you commit those changes, it'll start reaching out to the control center every 30 seconds. Yeah, zero-touch deployment, like I said, yeah, use Uplogix-control-center, or you can also use a DHCP SRV record, but I don't think we're using DHCP for our primary IP, so that's not really a very good option for us. But yeah, so there's a couple ways you can skin that cat, um, but for you guys, probably we're just going to be configuring that manually. Once your Uplogix is in the control center, this is probably in a later slide, but I should mention this now. When it first checks in, um, if you look at the inventory in the control center, you can see that there is this group at the bottom called Unassigned, and that's where your local managers are going to show up when they first check into the control center. Now you'll notice all my links are gray here. That's because Unassigned is kind of like our staging jail, right? You can't configure the system when it's unassigned. You can't SSH to it. You can't really do anything with the ports even. It's locked down until we reassign it into our proper inventory group, whatever that's going to be. So, you know, if I were to put it straight into the VA training group here, and then if I refresh this page, you'll notice now these links are live and I can now access these configuration elements. So, you know, once you've got your local manager in its proper inventory group, you know, all this remote management becomes active. And so just to kind of go over that briefly, down the left side, you've got the summary page, which is that first page you land on. It'll show you the Uplogix version number and uptime and so forth. And then if you click the next link down, that's alarms, and that's going to show you all the current alarms on that particular Uplogix. You can download the CSV view of that if you ever need. Same with the events. That's the next link there. That's going to show you, you know, things that we want to log that aren't alarm situations. So that's going to be user logins or configuration updates, that sort of thing. Then there is the scheduled tasks link that'll show you, you know, you can use the control center to schedule certain tasks. And so that'll show you the active ones or their status, you know, whether they succeeded or not. Then continuing down the accountability trail, you've got session logs. So every user session on the Uplogix is recorded start to finish. And so they get uploaded there for review. You know, it's got, you know, who logged in and when they did what. And then finally, you've got those service level verification stats, and those are for those network tests, which that's actually an optional component that you guys don't have. So the rest of under that, you've got everything gathered into kind of some groups: automation, network, out of band, security, and system. And those all let you configure those individual elements. So like if we needed to update the host name, that lives under the IP settings there, right? So you just open up network, go to IP, and you can easily just edit it there right in our GUI. You know, same for if we needed to add some IP whitelisting, that lives under protocol, right? We can do some firewall kind of on the Uplogix if we want to prevent certain, you know, IPs from SSHing to it and so forth. We can do that there. You know, and so on and so forth. SNMP, syslog, all of those configuration elements that you can configure on the command line also exist in the GUI on that left-hand menu. And I should mention also, all of that stuff also lives at the group level. So, you know, really, if you're updating something like DNS server IPs, you know, probably you're going to want to do that at the group level and have it inherit to all the local managers, just so that you don't have to click through all of them if we're updating anything like that. So yeah, just to talk about some of these a little bit more in the automation menu, you know, we can set up the local manager to answer IPT telephone calls. That's part of our network testing suite. So they can actually call each other with IP telephony VoIP calls, and we can measure, you know, how much jitter and latency and noise there is on the call and stuff like that. OS policies, that lets us set standard OSs, and we'll go into that a little bit more in a later section. But it lets us decide, you know, hey, you can set policies such as, you know, all my Cisco's need to be on a certain version of software. The Uplogix will find them all. It'll let you know which ones are out of compliance of that policy, and it can even automatically update their OS image to the policy OS if you want. Um, Rules and rule sets are where we do our custom automation, right? Rules are individual little decisions about, we detect this happening and we want to take this action. And then rule sets are how we aggregate those rules into complex automation activities. And then the SLV test, that's where you define those SLV tests that are synthetic network tests. Most of the network stuff is pretty self-explanatory, right? This is all configuration elements for the Uplogix local manager itself. So, we can set up, DNS, IP, NTP, um, different modes for the secondary Ethernet, right? If you need to put that into capture mode for, some packet sniffing, you can do that from there. SNMP, that's going to be, sending, or rather turning on the ability to walk the Uplogix local managers with your SNMP servers. And then syslog, that's configuration for us to send along our logs and events to a syslog server if you want. You can also configure sub interfaces from there on the management Ethernet port. For the out of band, again, this is probably all going to be configured in the hierarchy for the most part, so you won't have to mess with it too much. But the setup wizard is great if you're configuring a new one to configure it for. It'll kind of walk you through. Are you going to be using dial-in, cellular, and helps you configure all the rest of the elements here automatically. Pardon me. The modem is a lot of different settings relevant to the modem, such as, is it configured to answer incoming calls, which is how you guys have them configured. You can also set up, caller ID whitelists in there, and there are a bunch of settings for the cellular modem there too, such as configuring the APN or SMS services. That all lives in there. PPP, that's your dial-up settings. You guys probably, that's pretty much not used anywhere anymore, so you don't have to worry about that too much. And then Pulse is that network test that I was talking about, how we test the network to ensure that we turn on the out of band when we need to. And then, of course, we support VPNs if you need to have it connect back into a VPN. We support IPsec, V1, and V2, as well as PPTP on that. Security is pretty straightforward. Authentication settings, that's, stuff like how many password fails before lockout, unique password policies, that sort of stuff. That's all for you guys. That's all going to be controlled at the AAA at your on your TACAX or Radius servers. So and then passwords is similar stuff. Privileges, that's where you actually configure who is allowed to access what parts of the local manager. And we'll go into more depth in that in the security section in a week or two here, but that's how you can control, particular users or user groups are allowed to access certain ports, and then other users or user groups are allowed to access other ports. That all lives under the privileges section there. And then roles are, groups of commands that users are allowed to use. So we'll talk about that in depth in the security section as well. And then the system stuff, most of this is very straightforward, right? You can set a banner, you can set the timing of that archive process that I was talking about for the bulk data. You can configure email so that the local manager can send out email alerts to people. The default port settings is a really good one. That controls some of the fiddlier aspects of how we push and pull files, backup settings for the local managers. And we'll talk more about that in the device management section on Tuesday. But yeah, a couple other things, session timeout, you can configure all these elements there in the control center. So then that's all for the system level. At that point, you've got, just to show you in a live one, if I go grab one of our eval pods here. So that's all kind of about the Uplogix local manager itself, all the stuff on the left-hand menu. If you click through to one of the ports on the bottom here, for example, this one has a 2811 router connected to serial port 11 on the Uplogix, right? If I click through to there, there's another menu with some similar stuff. You have alarms as well. We also have changes where, because we're looking at those running configs, we can detect when changes have been made to them. So if I don't have any archived of those, so not a lot going on in this system. You've got the events again, where we're just making note of our backup processes in this case. Here are those files that are being archived up to the control center. So I've got one copy of the running config, I've got one copy of the startup, and we can also have it. It will automatically record the post every time it boots up, and we can have it pull tech as well and save that as a file, which can just save you a lot of time from doing that manually if you ever need that for Cisco TAC or anybody. Labels is where we can label this port with a text label that will let us assign privileges based on that, right? So if this was a firewall group only system, I could give it that label, and then users can be given permissions based on that label. In port settings, this controls some of the, like I said, more fiddly elements of how we push and pull files and things like this. So I can tell it to prefer FTP or TFTP, kind of whatever I want as far as that goes. Properties are just, you can put like a building location tag kind of thing here, a rack number. These are just arbitrary pair values that you can use. And then you've got, various reports that we can look at on this thing. Like I said, we do change reporting. These are probably going to be blank because I don't think anybody's been making any changes on this router in particular. And then finally, scheduled tasks. This will show me, current or previous scheduled tasks that have been scheduled on this port. So just a lot of information gathered about what's going on that system, right? From our point of view, and collected up into the control center there. Now, when you're in the control center, if you want to actually access those devices and get to the terminal of them, usually you hit the SSH button. That SSHs you to the local manager. From there, you can change to the different ports and use terminal to get into the device, or run whatever other troubleshooting stuff you want to do from there. And then on the detail page for each of those devices, there's a terminal button. And the terminal button will SSH you to the control center, to the local manager there at the edge. It'll have you log in, username and password as usual, but then it drops you straight into a terminal session. So that can be, just a little bit less typing. So, for example, on this router, if I hit that terminal button, it's going to open up our SSH application here, our terminal application. And there we are. A little slow today. There we are. Username, password, and there it is. It says permission granted for pass-through, and I am in my terminal session with enter tilde to exit, right? So it skips everything else. Oh, and we've got a fan failing on this router too. So, yeah, that's the terminal button. It's just a little bit of a shortcut, a little bit less typing. You don't have to switch to the port level when you use that. So the alarms page, yeah, by default, that first page is going to show you the 20 most recent alarms. You can sort them various ways, by message, by device, by duration. And I believe you guys' control center is pretty clean right now in terms of alarms, but sometimes when you're deploying a bunch of new ones, you'll see time is out of synchronization. Usually we just need to fix NTP for that sort of thing. Unable to communicate with device, that means that that's a router or switch that we're trying to check on its status, but we we can't talk to it for some reason. Either the console cable's been pulled out or it's shut off, something along those lines. The schedule tab. This is where you can, like I said, you can create filters to use to schedule tasks on either local managers or on your managed devices. So if you had, an OS update that you wanted to push out, you could make a filter that identified which devices you wanted to push the OS to, and then you use the schedule task right there to um, tell it what file to use to do the upgrade and so forth. You can also, if you have monitors that you want to schedule, for example, we probably have used this to schedule modem monitors on all of your remotes that check on the modem status periodically and report problems that it sees on that. So yeah, the schedule tab, that's for mass jobs, whether those are updates or monitors or whatever. And then the reports tab, that's where everybody thinks this is where you're going to view the reports, and it's not. It's where you configure the reports. Actually viewing the reports mostly lives in the inventory. Just to show you that real briefly, so if I go to, any of these inventory groups, if I go to the VA training group, there's this reports tab on the left, and you can see here I can look at, changes for the whole inventory group, right? Here's a change on this on the router on eval pod 2 a month ago or so. So yeah, so the reports tab is where you configure the reports, but you actually view them, either in an inventory group, or you can view them on an individual local manager. There's the same reports live there, but they'll be the information in them will be restricted to just from that local manager. Whereas the group level reports, they aggregate everything in that group and in the group's children. So yeah, that's how the reports work. You can also, under your user, you can schedule to have those reports emailed to you on a periodic basis, and we'll go into exactly how that works in a later segment too. So yeah, here's how you view them in the inventory itself. And we have them split up into various kind of groups. So now, in terms of configuring the control center, that's all going to live in the administration tab, right? It's where we set up privileges. It's where we have a file archive where you can update those, where you can put those update files, right? So if you have an OS image that you need to push down, you can load it into the file archive under the administration tab. It's also where the control center license is applied. And it's where you can create users, groups, roles, and has some basic server info in there, including the email server, SNMP, a couple other things.